Our next speaker, and give me 2 seconds, is Dr. Rory Monaghan, Galway. Rory leads the DST. He's a lecturer in energy engineering and school engineering at the National University of Ireland in Galway. He's a principal investigator in the NUI Galway Ryan Institute. He's a founder investigator in MARI, the Science Foundation Research Centre for Energy, Climate and Marine, and the director of the Energy Engineering Programme at Galway. Rory has been researching hydrogen and fuel cells since 2003, when he commenced his graduate studies at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's won over €2.6 million in competitive funding for sustainable energy in the fields of hydrogen, renewable gas, bioenergy conversion technologies, and computation modelling. Rory and his team within Galway, which includes ARIA, lead the long-term effects work package of GenComm. They're looking at how we make informed decisions and help communities, public sector, to make those informed decisions. Rory, you're up next. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for joining us on the webinar today. I'm going to talk about our work here at NUI Galway as part of the GenComm project, which is around the whole area of linking supply and demand and informing decision making about the hydrogen value chain. I found the answers to the poll very interesting, where cost comes out at number one, as I think most people would expect, but supply chain and coordination came out number two, and I'm excited to see that, because it really helps set the scene for what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes. Okay, so just to give an overview of what I'm going to talk about, I'll just speak very briefly about why we're looking at hydrogen. Paul covered a lot of that, so I won't spend too much time on that. I'll talk about the chicken and egg problem with hydrogen, and then how a decision support tool, which we're working on, can help address that. And then I'll spend most of the talk talking about some case studies that we have run from our group here in Galway, and that we have applied to different scales of hydrogen value chain models, and what the outlook going forward is. Okay. Well, the main reason we're talking about hydrogen, and I'm going to restrict the scope of this talk to renewable hydrogen. So that is hydrogen that is produced from electricity, and ideally that electricity coming from renewable sources. The main reason that we're speaking about this is sort of summarized in this graph from the FCHJU, that's the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, which is an EU funding organization for hydrogen work. Hydrogen can serve as the link. I like to think of hydrogen as a glue. It can serve as a glue between highly renewable electricity systems and decarbonized end uses of transport fuel, industrial heat, feedstocks, and basically anything across the energy use sector. Hydrogen serves as a glue where you can transform that renewable electricity into a highly dense energy carrier like hydrogen. We can also have energy storage from hydrogen, so we can increase the resilience of electricity systems, and as Paul talked about, have this power to gas coupling. The European Union has really recognized the value of hydrogen, and I realize this is a very busy slide, but I'll try and orient you through it. If you add up the trajectories of the European Union decarbonization efforts, and if you look at what we need to be at to avoid 2 degrees of global warming by 2050, there is a gap of 1 billion tons of carbon that needs to be closed, right? So our trajectories are 1 billion tons of carbon off from where they need to be by 2050. Studies from the Hydrogen Roadmap Europe have shown that hydrogen can assist in closing half of that gap. So 562 million tons of carbon can be avoided through the use of hydrogen. And the different colors here illustrate the different sectors that hydrogen can make an impact in. So a big impact from transport, big impact from heating for buildings, industry feedstock, and industry heat. And the interesting thing about hydrogen is that these sectors are almost all classified as the hard to abate sectors. That means these are sectors that it is very difficult to decarbonize through electrification alone. So a question that those of us working on hydrogen get frequently is, Why would we do hydrogen when we can go electric? Well, I don't view this as an either or. I view hydrogen and electrification as being perfect complements to each other. And where electricity takes the heavy lifting in domestic heat and other forms of heat and in personal mobility, but hydrogen goes after those harder to decarbonize sectors. And that's really the basis for what we're looking at within GenComm. So chicken, eggs, and hydrogen. What do I mean by this? Well, let's imagine that we're a producer of renewable electricity and we're interested in hydrogen. We can see some benefits from the storage aspects and the grid balancing aspects of hydrogen. So you might want to invest, but who would buy hydrogen from you? Electricity generators are not typically sellers of industrial gases. Equally, if I am a bus fleet operator, the person on the right-hand side here, and I'm interested in using hydrogen fuel cell buses as a solution for air quality and decarbonization of public transport, where can I source that renewable hydrogen? How can I ensure it's renewable? Well, this is where the part of the work of GenComm that NUI Galway are involved in comes in. And it's a sort of a link between the two called the Community Hydrogen Forum. So we're kind of talking about this as this missing link, this to address this chicken and egg problem. The Community Hydrogen Forum, which is going to be talked about extensively by Ian Williamson later in today's webinar, essentially serves a number of purposes. It serves to inform potential stakeholders about hydrogen. It hosts something called the Decision Support Tool, which is what I'll be talking about primarily today. And then it motivates to action. It tells you what the next steps should be in pursuing hydrogen as a solution to local energy problems. So focusing specifically on the Decision Support Tool, how does it work? What does it do? Well, it's here to support stakeholders who are interested in evaluating hydrogen, particularly at a community level. And the big motivators for these are community development, decarbonization, and energy security. So we really try and come at it from a number of these different points of view. And we try and demonstrate the potential for hydrogen through examining its role in fueling public transport bus fleets. I saw a question that came in on the chat earlier, and hopefully I'll get a chance to answer it in this talk about how much additional electricity would we need to put to run public transport off hydrogen? And the answer is really not much. Not much. If you look at how much renewable electricity is available in Ireland now and how much is curtailed, we don't need a huge amount more to run our public transport systems off hydrogen. We're starting the process of expanding our work to look also at solar generated hydrogen, and we'll eventually be considering bioenergy generated hydrogen as well. So what we do essentially is we look at large cities, or cities and large towns and cities. We look at what the annual energy demand for their bus fleets are, and we calculate a hydrogen equivalent. We then look at the supply side. We start examining wind farms. We've got statistics for many of the wind farms in Ireland and across Northwest Europe, and we're able to generate synthetic data for ones that we don't have available statistics for. We can look at what this curtailed energy available is, and we can start to size optimally electrolyzers that would be positioned at those wind farms. So we can come up with a hydrogen supply. So we've got our demand from the bus fleets, we've got our supply from this curtailed electricity. We can then link the two together with a hydrogen supply chain. If we know the locations of these bus fleets, which are in cities, and we know the locations of these wind farms, and there are nearly 4,500 wind farms across Northwestern Europe, and we know their locations, we can use geographical information systems, GIS mapping, to map out supply chains that link the two. And as a final stage in this, we can then consider top-up power needed so that the electrolyzers are running not just off curtailed wind, which would only be running occasionally, but can be running full-time with top-up power from either wind farms or the electricity grid. And this can really increase operating hours and lower costs. So another way of considering how the decision support tool is in blocks. We take input from users, we have a technical model, we've got some built-in techno-economic parameters which are built with our GenComm partners, and this is the true value of GenComm, is that we have everything from pilot plant construction to the technical and economic modeling, to the decision support tool production on the end. So GenComm really is the perfect forum for making a model like this. We make the economic model, and we can also build in a transport model then from mapping. So this is just some of the variables that are used, that are calculated. I won't go through them in enormous detail right now. And we can end up calculating the full cost of hydrogen produced from this, not the full cost, sorry, the levelized cost of hydrogen produced relative to diesel. In all the numbers that I'm going to show you, I think it's very important to realize that the costs that I'm showing here are levelized costs. So these are the minimum costs that are possible, or that can be used to recover lifetime operating costs for this hydrogen system. So, sorry, lifetime operating and capital costs for the hydrogen system. This is not what you would necessarily go out and pay for hydrogen now. This does not include taxes. It doesn't include some aspects of land costs and some aspects of construction costs. But what we've tried to do is make a baseline of comparison for across Ireland and across Northwest European countries. Okay, so some value chain case studies. So I'm going to look at different scales. I'm going to look at the local scale for here in my hometown of Galway, the national scale for Ireland if we were to develop a coordinated national supply chain of hydrogen to run bus fleets. We can then look at a multinational decarbonisation of Northwest Europe's city bus fleets. We'll see that example. And then we'll also look at gas grid injection, which is not looking at the bus fleet side of things, but is looking at the use of hydrogen to offset fossil fuel gas. And we published a paper on this, and I'll be sharing the information on this. So for Galway, we did a reasonably small scale case study. In Galway, we have about 30 kilometres west of Galway is Ireland's largest wind farm, 174 megawatt Galway wind park. It's starting to face into some challenges around curtailment. And so we've worked with the local stakeholders here in Galway and at the wind park to develop a small case study that said how much would it cost if we were to install an electrolyser at the wind farm site to avoid the curtailment and constraint and to produce fuel for the Galway bus network for only 5 buses. And this is just some of our output data. Again, I've described the model, so I'm not going into it in much detail. This is levelized cost of hydrogen. Okay, so this again does not include taxes, it does not include profits, it does not include some aspects of land costs and construction costs. It doesn't include grid connection costs either. But this, so this is the minimum possible hydrogen cost that would cover the operator's expenses. And we find that if different regimes of operating the electrolyzer, so curtailed only, obviously leads to higher hydrogen costs. Using wind energy when it's available to run the electrolyzer significantly reduces costs. And running the electrolyzer full time by topping it up with additional power from the grid decreased costs a little bit more. And we can see, if we look at average annual electricity prices between 0 and 8 cents per kilowatt hour, we can see a spread of costs. But how does this compare to bus fueling costs? Well, if we then translate this into a bus operational cost per kilometer, we can see how it compares to the red line of diesel here. And you can see that again, for a fully optimized system, we're starting to get into a comparable range of costs. And we can see that any changes in carbon tax are going to have a big impact on the comparability of these two energy systems. Looking then at the national scale, what if we scale this study up? And this is the nice thing about a decision support tool, we can do what-if studies. What if we scale this up beyond 5 buses in Galway and said we are going to maximize the use of curtailed and wind-generated electricity to run the bus networks for the major bus networks in Ireland. So we've looked at Belfast, Cork, Dublin, Galway, and Limerick. We've been able to say that for each of these lines, so Dublin here is the red line, which is not the lowest cost, by the way. Cork comes in at the lowest costs because it's access to many wind farms in West Cork and Kerry. But Dublin has got the longest line here, and it means that we can start to decarbonise the bus fleet in Dublin at a cost currently of about €7 per kg. And if we go further afield and start pulling hydrogen from other wind farms further and further away from Galway, that have gone further and further away from Dublin, which have a better resource, we will increase costs slightly. But we can decarbonize 100% of the city bus fleets using hydrogen supply chains like this, that only use curtailed wind and a small portion of the wind that is generated at the existing wind farms in Ireland. If we project forward to 2030 costs, we see a significant drop. This is where the hydrogen industry believes the costs for equipment operating costs are going by 2030. So we can see a significant drop in costs for all the towns. And again, how does this compare to bus operational costs for diesel? Unfortunately, sorry, my yellow box there has covered over my blocks for diesel. There's some behind the CO2 price wording. There is a block there for diesel, but what these numbers are showing is that by 2030 we have cost parity with diesel, regardless of what the carbon price is. So there's significant scope for reduction in costs for hydrogen. I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to go slightly fast. This is what I want to really get you to sort of take away from this call, is the online decision support tool. So if you go to our online portal for the decision support tool, which is communityh2.eu, and then you can go to the decision support tool tab, or DST. This is our publicly available version of the decision support tool. It is built for Northwest Europe, and it essentially tries to simplify the output that I've just shown you on an entirely Northwest Europe scale. So the kinds of things that you'll see, again, we'll look at this solely for Dublin, and what the kinds of outputs that you'll see if you were to click on Dublin on the website would be, you would see first of all this graph that shows the percentage of diesel usage that would be offset if we used curtailed wind only to produce hydrogen, this light colored bar, or if we used curtailed wind topped up with exportable power from wind farms. We could offset 100% of diesel use to run the Dublin bus fleet. This is our cost comparison, and again, you know, we're trying to compare costs all across Europe. So there are difficulties in how we interpret that data. So we've taken a baseline of diesel operating costs to be 100%, and we've looked then at different electrolyzer operating regimes and different electricity costs to come up with a spread of hydrogen-based costs using currently available technology. We can also then look at the spread of where that hydrogen is coming from. How many kilometers does that hydrogen have to travel in order to make it to the Dublin bus fleet? So for any of these cities in Northwest Europe, if you click on, you'll see then a distribution of distances that hydrogen has had to travel. We've also then, as a very, very final point, we've done some work on a gas grid injection supply chain for Ireland, again using curtailed wind, available exportable wind, or curtailed plus wind electricity plus grid electricity to increase run hours. We've done the same studies, except we have looked at gas grid injection. So what the maps are showing here, these light blue lines on the maps, these are the road supply lines that bring hydrogen from wind farms to the gas grid. The gas grid is the black line with the black triangles on it. So this is all published in an academic research paper, and it's available freely for everyone at the link above. So we can see again that here's our levelized cost if we look at high electricity costs, and here's our levelized cost if we look at low electricity costs. So the costs are coming down to the range of 5 to 7 euros per kg. But again, this is levelized cost. This is not the cost that you will go out and pay today for renewably generated hydrogen, because the supply chains simply aren't there yet. This is all assuming highly optimized supply chains. So I'll leave it on this slide and encourage you to go to the community h2.eu website and play with the tool yourself. And please give us feedback. We're constantly looking for ways to make it more user-friendly and more applicable. And with that, I'll hand it back to Paul.
Rory, thank you very much indeed. And we have a couple of questions. In fact, the chat room is live and we have a lot of stuff coming in. And as I've said, I've fed back to everybody. We may not get to everybody's questions, but if you have a question and it's pertinent, make sure you put your email in there if you wish, and we will get back to you. We will distribute the questions among the speakers that we think are relevant. And over the next week or two, we'll get back to you. Today is only the first step in the process of engaging with the wider public. And one of those steps, question from Jared for you, Rory. What is meant by curtailed wind?
Okay, sorry, I skimmed over this a little quickly. So there are two ways that wind generated in a wind farm might not actually make it to an end user on the electricity grid. And these two things are referred to as curtailment and constraint. So constraint, I'll talk about constraint first. Constraint means that in the specific location where the wind farm is operating, say it's a particularly windy day and there's not enough electricity use locally. Constraint means that the local electricity grid is not able to accept that wind generated electricity onto the grid. It's just not capable of transferring it at the volumes being generated. Curtailment then is that issue, but on a national scale, on a much larger scale. So if Ireland as a whole is generating more wind than can be consumed and then can be put through the interconnectors to the UK. So it really means, when I talk about curtailed wind and constrained wind, I mean wind that is not able to be taken onto the grid.
Excellent. A lot of other questions coming through about transport and different items. And if we keep those on hold, folks, because later on in the presentation, Mark Welsh will be talking about the hydrogen transport and the bus trials in Belfast and some of the other work that Mark Teevan in Toyota, who's leading up Hydrogen Mobility Ireland, is looking at. So as we said earlier, it's not just GenComm and so on, it's working in partnership with others. And that will address some of the mobility issues that we see in Ireland and lessons that can be learned beyond.
Yeah.
Well, another question for you, Rory, just before we go. All case studies have involved large-scale wind farms at present. This is from James at Robinson Quarries. Is there any market for standalone turbines operated by private users at present?
Yes. So the wind farms that we've shown in our map of Ireland there, those are all of the currently grid-connected wind farms in Ireland. So everything from a single 1 megawatt turbine up to the Galway wind park, 175 megawatts. So everything is shown there. The costs involved in a small standalone will be quite high per unit of hydrogen generated, but it depends what your current situation is. It could be that you are highly exposed to fluctuating fuel prices, whether it's diesel or LPG. And it could be that you're able to incur that higher cost. What our model does, it includes economies of scale. So the bigger production units get a lower price or a lower cost of hydrogen generated. So it really everyone's scenario is highly case dependent. So if anyone would like more information on that or to talk further, I'd be very happy to continue the conversation.
Rory, thank you very much for that. One other point before we move on to our next speaker. A lot of you are coming in with your key takeaways, and I'd like to thank Orag O'Hara, who's one of our associate partners in Louth County Council, how the local councils then have their takeaways. And he talked there about the animation. That GenComm animation is available for everybody to download from our website. It lets you see in 1 5-minute slot what GenComm is doing and then to extrapolate the potential of what we're moving forward. Rory, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
As we move on.